The late summer sun filtered through the tall trees lining the driveway as Amara and Terrence pulled up to the gates of Cedar Pines Resort. It was the kind of place people dreamt about when they thought of luxury weddings, sprawling green lawns, a charming rustic lodge surrounded by blooming gardens, and the serene backdrop of a crystal-clear lake. The couple had been eagerly awaiting this day for months, ready to finalize the details for their dream wedding. Amara glanced at Terrence, her eyes brimming with excitement. "This is it, babe," she said, squeezing his hand. "We're finally here." Terrence smiled, feeling the anticipation rising within him. He'd proposed to Amara on a whim at a cozy restaurant in the city, overwhelmed by how right it felt to spend the rest of his life with her. Planning this wedding had been a labor of love for both of them, and Cedar Pines had always been their top choice. Its reputation for hosting high-profile weddings and its timeless elegance made it the perfect place to celebrate their union. "I can't believe we're about to walk through those doors and see everything in person," Terrence replied, parking the car. "It's all finally coming together." The couple exited the car, dressed smartly but comfortably for the occasion. Amara, ever the stylish one, wore a flowing white dress that danced in the gentle breeze. Terrence, always looking sharp, had on a tailored blazer with a crisp shirt beneath. As they walked toward the entrance, they exchanged hopeful smiles. It was a big day. Inside the main lodge, they were greeted by a concierge who offered a polite smile before directing them to Mr. Stone's office. Mr. Stone was the resort's manager and the man who had been coordinating with Amara through email for weeks. She had spoken highly of him. He had been helpful and prompt in the early stages of their planning. As they approached his office, Amara felt a small flicker of excitement. This meeting was the final step before they would secure the venue, and everything from the catering to the flower arrangements was about to fall into place. "Ready?" she whispered to Terrence as they reached the door. "More than ready," he replied, giving her a reassuring nod. Mr. Stone's office was large and well-decorated, filled with polished wooden furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the resort's grounds. Behind his desk sat the man himself, Mr. Stone, a tall, middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair and a demeanor that was professional, if not a little too formal. "Ah, Mr. and Mrs. Davis," he greeted them, standing up and extending a hand, though his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Welcome to Cedar Pines." Amara's instincts immediately told her something was off. She'd spoken to Mr. Stone multiple times before, but now, standing face to face, there was a distinct lack of warmth in his welcome. She shrugged it off at first. Maybe he was just having a long day. "Thank you so much for meeting with us," Amara said politely, shaking his hand. Terrence followed suit. They all sat down, and Mr. Stone opened a thick folder in front of him, briefly glancing at a few documents before looking up. "So, you're here to finalize everything for your wedding, correct? You've chosen the grand ballroom and the lakefront ceremony space." If I'm not mistaken, his tone was clipped, mechanical. "That's right," Terrence chimed in. "We've been planning this for a while now, and we're really excited to lock everything down." Mr. Stone nodded, though he still didn't seem to share their enthusiasm. "Well, I'm afraid there's been a bit of a situation." Amara frowned. "A situation?" "Yes, unfortunately, there's been a conflict with the dates you've requested. We seem to have had a scheduling error, and the resort is no longer available for your wedding date." The words hit Amara like a brick wall. She blinked, momentarily stunned. "But I confirmed those dates with you months ago. We've been planning everything around that specific weekend." Terrence shifted uncomfortably in his seat, sensing something in the air beyond just a simple scheduling error. "Is there anything you can do? We've put down a deposit and already started making arrangements." Mr. Stone sighed, as though the conversation were an inconvenience. "I'm afraid there's really nothing I can do. We've had a very prestigious booking come through for that weekend, and it takes priority. I apologize for the misunderstanding." Amara felt a surge of frustration. Prestigious booking? What was that supposed to mean? She was trying to keep calm, but the more Mr. Stone spoke, the more she felt something wasn't right. "We're willing to be flexible with some of the details," she said, her voice measured. "But our wedding date is set, and we confirmed it with you long ago. I don't understand how this is suddenly an issue." Mr. Stone leaned back in his chair, clasping his hands together. "As I mentioned, we've had an unexpected booking come through, and I'm afraid the atmosphere of your wedding may not be the right fit for the weekend in question." The subtle shift in his tone made both Amara and Terrence pause. The right fit? The words hung in the air, heavy with implications that Mr. Stone didn't need to spell out. Amara's heart sank. She dealt with people like Mr. Stone before, those who wouldn't say what they really meant, but whose intentions were clear as day. Terrence's jaw tightened. "What exactly are you implying, Mr. Stone?" Mr. Stone offered a rehearsed, almost patronizing smile. "Oh, nothing at all. I just want to ensure that both parties are fully comfortable. After all, our clientele comes to Cedar Pines for a certain kind of experience." Amara's hands clenched in her lap. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were sharp. "Are you suggesting that our wedding wouldn't offer that experience?" For a moment, Mr. Stone didn't respond. Then, with a vague shrug, he said, "It's not about that. It's simply a matter of the resort's tradition and maintaining a certain level of exclusivity." Exclusivity. There it was. The word that sealed the meaning behind Mr. Stone's polite facade. Terrence leaned forward, his voice firm. "I see. Thank you for your time, Mr. Stone." Without another word, he stood up, and Amara followed suit. The message had been delivered loud and clear, and the sting of it left a bitter taste in their mouths. They weren't welcome here not because of the date or the venue, but because of who they were. As they walked out of the office and toward the parking lot, Amara's mind raced. She wasn't going to let this slide. "Babe," she said quietly, glancing at Terrence. "This isn't over." Terrence looked at her, his expression hardening. "I know." The car ride home from Cedar Pines was quiet. Amara stared out the window, the scenic countryside rolling by in a blur, her thoughts spinning in 1,000 directions. What had just happened? Everything had seemed so perfect, so meticulously planned, and then in a matter of minutes it had all unraveled because of something as ridiculous as a prestigious booking and exclusivity. Terrence kept his hands gripped on the steering wheel, his expression unreadable, but Amara could feel the tension radiating off him. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, it was simply charged with frustration and disbelief. After a few minutes, Amara spoke, her voice steady but tinged with anger. "You know what that was about, right?" Terrence nodded, his gaze fixed on the road. "Of course I know." The man didn't even try to hide it. Amara bit her lip, remembering the subtle sneer Mr. Stone had barely concealed as he spoke about the resort's tradition and clientele. They both knew what those words really meant. It was a reminder that no matter how successful they were or how meticulously they planned their future, there were still places people who saw them as outsiders unwelcome. "I should have seen it coming," Amara muttered, shaking her head. "We've faced this before. But still, I thought things were different now. I thought we were past this." Terrence reached over, placing a comforting hand on hers. "It's not your fault, Mara. It's not on us. It's on them. People like Mr. Stone, they're stuck in the past and they think they can keep us out by hiding behind fancy words and traditions." Amara let out a deep breath, feeling a surge of gratitude for Terrence's calm demeanor. He had a way of centering her when things spiraled out of control, but this time, the sting felt deeper than usual. Maybe it was because the wedding was supposed to be one of the happiest moments of their lives, a celebration of their love. Yet here they were, being told no, shown that their love wasn't good enough for Cedar Pines' exclusive standards. As they pulled up to their home, a stylish townhouse in the heart of the city, Amara felt a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't going to let this go. Not this time. This wasn't just about them anymore. It was about every couple who had been quietly denied, every couple who had been turned away because they didn't fit the mold. Inside the house, Terrence loosened his tie and sank onto the couch, watching as Amara paced the living room, her mind clearly churning with ideas. "Okay," she said, stopping in front of him. "We can't let this slide." Terrence raised an eyebrow. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking we need to expose what's going on at Cedar Pines. They're not going to get away with treating people like us as less than." Amara's eyes flashed with determination. "We're not just going to find another venue and move on. We need to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." Terrence considered her words carefully, then nodded. "You're right, but how do we do that? They're a big, well-established resort. They've probably kept this under wraps for years." Amara smirked, her lawyer instincts kicking in. "I'm going to start by doing some digging. You'd be surprised how much you can uncover when you know where to look." Terrence watched her with admiration as she moved toward her laptop, already typing away. He knew better than to doubt her once she set her mind on something. Amara was a force of nature, and when she wanted justice, she got it. While Amara began her research, Terrence thought back to their meeting with Mr. Stone. He remembered the dismissive tone, the way the manager had looked through them, rather than at them, as though they were just an inconvenience he wanted to sweep away. He had kept his cool at the resort, but now, sitting in their home, the anger he'd been holding back started to bubble to the surface. "Amara," he called out, getting up from the couch. "What if we do more than just expose them?" She glanced up from her laptop, intrigued. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if we don't just make them apologize or admit what they've been doing? What if we go a step further?" Amara tilted her head. "I'm listening. What if we buy the place?" The idea hung in the air for a moment, bold and outrageous. But the longer Amara thought about it, the more it began to make sense. They weren't just two individuals with a grievance, they were a couple with the resources, the connections, and the will to change things on a larger scale. "You're serious?" she asked, her eyes widening with excitement. Terrence nodded. "Look, I've been thinking about it. The place can't be doing that well financially. It's in the middle of nowhere, and from what I saw, it's probably surviving on reputation alone. What if we put in an offer? If we buy Cedar Pines, we can turn it into something real, something inclusive, a place that actually celebrates love in all its forms." Amara smiled, a glint of mischief in her eyes. "I like the way you think, Mr. Davis." They both sat down together, the energy between them crackling with newfound purpose. While Amara continued her investigation into Cedar Pines' history of discrimination, Terrence began looking into the resort's finances. It didn't take long for them to uncover some interesting details. Cedar Pines, once a top-tier destination for weddings and high-society events, had been struggling in recent years. The rise of newer, more modern venues had eaten into their market, and the management was clearly trying to cling to an outdated business model. Terrence grinned as he showed Amara the financial reports. "Look at this. They're barely keeping afloat. If we make a move now, we could really make something happen." Amara leaned over, scanning the numbers. "You're right, this could work. But we need to be strategic about it. First, we expose what they've been doing. Then, we swoop in and make the deal." Terrence nodded, the wheels already turning in his head. "Let's do it. We're going to show them that love isn't something you can exclude or put limits on, and we're going to make Cedar Pines the symbol of that." With their plan in place, Amara and Terrence exchanged a determined glance. They weren't just fighting for themselves anymore. They were about to take on something much bigger, and they were ready. A few weeks had passed since Amara and Terrence's uncomfortable encounter with Mr. Stone, and things were moving fast. Amara had dug deep into Cedar Pines' past, and what she found confirmed their suspicions. She'd uncovered multiple reports of couples mostly black, but also other minority couples who had been quietly turned away from the resort over the years. None of the incidents had made big waves, but Amara's research suggested a clear pattern of discrimination. She had also connected with several of these couples. After hearing their stories, she became even more determined to bring this injustice to light. Armed with testimonials and documentation, Amara reached out to a local journalist known for exposing discrimination in businesses and institutions. The story was too compelling to ignore. As they sat in their living room one evening, Amara scrolled through her phone, reading the latest draft of the article. She looked up at Terrence, who was sitting at the dining table, his laptop open in front of him. "The article goes live tomorrow morning," she said, her voice laced with both excitement and nerves. "This is it." Terrence glanced up, nodding. "This is how we start." The article would be the first step in their plan. Amara and Terrence weren't just looking for a public apology from Cedar Pines, they wanted real accountability and change. And they knew that in today's world, social media was a powerful tool for amplifying voices that had been silenced for too long. Early the next morning, the article was published. The headline was blunt and attention-grabbing: "A prestigious resort or a haven for discrimination. Couples speak out about Cedar Pines' exclusionary practices." Within hours, it began to gain traction. Amara's inbox was flooded with messages, some from other couples who had faced similar discrimination, others from outraged readers who were appalled by what they were learning. Social media lit up with hashtags calling for a boycott of Cedar Pines. People shared the article widely, and soon, it caught the attention of advocacy groups and influencers who specialized in highlighting social justice issues. The story was no longer a quiet grievance whispered among affected couples. It was becoming a public outcry. Amara couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. This was more than just exposing a single venue's practices. It was about shedding light on the quiet, insidious forms of discrimination that people of color often faced in spaces that pretended to be inclusive but were anything but. That evening, as the sun began to set, Amara and Terrence sat together on their back porch, watching the city lights flicker to life. "I can't believe how fast this is spreading," Amara said, scrolling through her phone. "People are angry. And they should be." Terrence leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a satisfied smile playing on his lips. "It's about time places like Cedar Pines are called out. They've gotten away with this for too long." Suddenly, Amara's phone buzzed with a new notification. It was an email from Cedar Pines' Puerto Rico team. She opened it, and her eyebrows shot up in surprise. "You've got to be kidding me." "What?" Terrence asked, sitting up. Amara turned her phone so he could see. The email was filled with corporate jargon, but the message was clear. Cedar Pines was claiming the article was misleading and inaccurate, and they were demanding a retraction. Terrence let out a low chuckle. "They're scrambling. They know this is bad for business." "Of course they are," Amara said, shaking her head. "But we're not backing down. I've got too much evidence, too many stories. They can't bury this." Just then, Amara's phone buzzed again, but this time it was a text message from one of the journalists who had been covering the story. She opened it and quickly read the message. "You're not going to believe this," she said, her eyes wide with excitement. "What now?" "They're selling the resort." Terrence sat up straighter. "What?" The journalist just got a tip from an insider at Cedar Pines. The resort's been struggling financially, and with this whole thing blowing up, they're looking to sell as soon as possible to avoid any further damage. Terrence stared at her for a moment, his mind racing. "So they're trying to cut their losses." "Exactly," Amara said, standing up and pacing the porch. "This is our chance. If we move fast, we can get ahead of any other buyers. This is exactly what we've been waiting for." Terrence rubbed his chin, thinking quickly. "I've been running numbers all week. We can make this work. If we secure the right investors, we can put in a serious offer." Amara stopped pacing and looked at him, her eyes gleaming with determination. "Then let's do it." The next few days were a whirlwind. Amara and Terrence wasted no time. Terrence reached out to his network of business associates, floating the idea of purchasing the resort and transforming it into an inclusive, welcoming space for all couples. Surprisingly, the response was overwhelmingly positive. Investors saw the potential not just in the business but in the statement it would make. As Terrence worked on securing the financial side, Amara continued pushing the story. More news outlets picked it up, and Cedar Pines' reputation was rapidly declining. Their attempt to downplay the allegations only made things worse, with more couples coming forward to share their experiences. One evening, while they were both working in their living room, Terrence received a phone call. He glanced at the screen, and his expression shifted. "It's the broker handling the sale." Amara watched him closely as he answered the call, trying to gauge his reaction. After a few minutes of conversation, Terrence hung up, a triumphant smile spreading across his face. "We're in," he said. "The resort's officially on the market, and they're open to offers. We need to move fast, but we've got a real shot at this." Amara grinned, her heart racing with excitement. "This is happening. We're really doing this." Terrence nodded, his eyes bright with determination. "We're about to change the game, Amara. Cedar Pines will never be the same again." The deal to buy Cedar Pines Resort was moving forward at a lightning pace. Terrence had assembled a small but committed group of investors, each one eager to be part of the project. Many of them were motivated not just by the business opportunity, but by the chance to be part of something transformative, a symbol of progress and inclusion in an industry that had long been dominated by exclusionary practices. Amara and Terrence's story had struck a chord, and the investors saw potential for the resort to become more than just a wedding venue. It could be a statement. Still, with everything moving so quickly, there was little room for error. As the weeks went on, Amara felt the weight of the pressure. They were pushing hard to finalize the purchase before any other potential buyers swooped in, all while balancing the media storm surrounding Cedar Pines. But despite the chaos, the couple remained focused, driven by the knowledge that they were on the cusp of something monumental. One afternoon, Amara sat in their home office, poring over legal documents and contracts related to the sale. The phone rang, and she quickly answered, recognizing the number. It was the resort's real estate broker. "Good afternoon, MS." Davis the broker began, his tone professional but cautious. "I wanted to update you on the status of your offer." Amara's heart raced, but she maintained her composure. "Go ahead." "Well," the broker continued, "I'm pleased to inform you that your offer is currently the most competitive on the table. However, there is another buyer showing interest, an older company that has some connections in the industry. The owners of Cedar Pines are leaning toward your offer. But they're nervous. They want to ensure that whoever buys the resort has the experience to keep it running smoothly, especially given the current climate." Amara frowned. "What exactly do you mean by the current climate?" The broker hesitated for a moment. "I'm sure you've seen the recent media attention. The owners are concerned about how the negative press might affect the resort's future. They're wondering if your proposal will bring more controversy or stability." Amara could hardly believe what she was hearing. "Let me get this straight," she said, her voice steely. "They're worried about us bringing controversy to the resort after what they've been exposed for." The broker quickly backpedaled. No, of course not. It's just they're nervous. They want to be sure that the new owners can turn things around without any lingering issues." Amara took a deep breath, collecting her thoughts. "Well, you can assure them that if Terrence and I purchase the resort, we'll not only run it successfully but turn it into a place that truly thrives. And if they're worried about controversy, I suggest they consider who's been causing the real problems at Cedar Pines all these years." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line, before the broker finally responded, his tone more respectful. "I understand, MS Davis. I'll pass that along to the owners. We'll be in touch soon." As Amara hung up the phone, Terrence walked into the room, fresh from a meeting with one of their potential investors. He noticed the look on her face immediately. "What's up?" he asked. "They're stalling," Amara said, shaking her head. "Apparently the owners are nervous about how the press will affect the sale. Can you believe that? After all the garbage they've been pulling, we're the ones they're worried about." Terrence sat down beside her, his expression serious. "That's their last-ditch effort to hold on to power. They know we're close to getting this, and they're panicking." Amara nodded, feeling her frustration build. "We've worked too hard for this. I'm not letting them drag their feet while they figure out how to save face." Terrence leaned back in his chair, thinking for a moment. "Maybe it's time we take matters into our own hands. If they're worried about press, let's show them just how much support we have. I've been thinking, what if we start rallying people behind the idea of what Cedar Pines could be?" Amara raised an eyebrow. "You mean go public with our plans?" "Exactly," Terrence said, warming up to the idea. "We're not just buying a resort, we're buying a symbol. And if we get people excited about that, we can make it clear to the owners that we are the best chance for Cedar Pines to survive and thrive." Amara sat back, considering his words. It was a bold move, but it made sense. They had the community on their side, and the public was eager for change. Why not harness that energy? "I like it," Amara said, a smile creeping onto her face. "Let's do it." That evening, they drafted a public statement, carefully outlining their vision for the future of Cedar Pines. They didn't hold back. The statement highlighted the resort's discriminatory history and pledged that under their ownership, Cedar Pines would become an inclusive space where all couples, regardless of race, background, or identity, would feel welcome. They painted a picture of a resort reborn, one that embraced diversity and celebrated love in all its forms. Amara posted the statement to her social media platforms, and within hours it began to spread like wildfire. People who had followed their story from the beginning shared it enthusiastically, praising the couple's determination and vision. The response was overwhelmingly positive, and soon, the statement caught the attention of larger media outlets. News stories began to pop up about the couple's bid to transform Cedar Pines, and the narrative shifted. No longer was the resort's future defined by its controversial past. Now, people were excited about what it could become under new ownership. The following morning, the broker called again, his tone noticeably more upbeat. "Ms. Davis, I wanted to let you know that the owners are very interested in moving forward with your offer. They're impressed with the response you've garnered, and they're confident that you and Mr. Davis will bring the resort in a positive direction." Amara smiled. "I'm glad to hear that. Let's finalize the deal." Terrence, standing nearby, couldn't help but grin as he overheard the conversation. When Amara hung up, he pulled her into a tight hug. "We did it," he whispered, his voice filled with pride. "We're going to own Cedar Pines." Amara pulled back, looking up at him with a determined glint in her eyes. "We're just getting started." The day finally arrived. After months of negotiations, planning, and a whirlwind of media attention, Amara and Terrence were now the proud owners of Cedar Pines Resort. The final papers had been signed, the deal was done, and the resort was theirs to transform into the vision they had been working toward since the day they were denied their wedding. Standing on the grand porch of the resort's main building, Amara took a deep breath, the crisp mountain air filling her lungs. It was a perfect fall afternoon, the trees around them a vibrant mix of red, orange, and yellow. The resort had never looked more beautiful or more full of potential. She looked over at Terrence, who was standing by her side, staring out at the property with a sense of pride and accomplishment. "Can you believe it?" Terrence said, his voice filled with awe. "We really did it." Amara smiled, slipping her hand into his. "We did," she said softly. "But now the real work begins." In the weeks leading up to this moment, they had spent every waking hour planning how to rebrand Cedar Pines, how to rebuild it into the inclusive, welcoming space they had always dreamed of. They had brought on a diverse team of new staff, including a wedding planner known for working with a wide range of clients, and contractors to give the resort a fresh, modern look while still maintaining its rustic charm. They had even consulted with community leaders and wedding professionals to ensure that the changes they made would foster a truly inclusive environment. Amara's phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. She glanced down and saw a message from the head of their PR team. "Congratulations. Everything's ready for the grand reopening announcement tomorrow." Tomorrow would be a major event, the official announcement of the reopening of Cedar Pines, complete with press coverage, a ribbon-cutting ceremony, and a tour of the newly updated venue. But the real highlight of the day would be their wedding. After everything they had been through, Amara and Terrence had decided that there was no better way to celebrate the rebirth of the resort than to hold their own wedding there. They had planned it to be a small, intimate affair with close family and friends, but they knew that the symbolic importance of the event would extend far beyond their guest list. The night before the big day, the couple walked through the property, admiring the changes that had been made. The gardens had been carefully redesigned to include spaces for ceremonies of all kinds, including a beautiful lakeside setting where they would exchange their vows the next day. Inside the main lodge, the grand ballroom had been updated with modern touches, but its historic charm remained intact. "I love what we've done with the place," Terrence said, glancing around at the polished wood floors and the new lighting fixtures that added warmth and elegance to the space. "It's exactly what I pictured," Amara replied, her voice filled with satisfaction. "It's not just a resort anymore. It's a place where everyone belongs." They made their way outside to the edge of the lake, the setting sun casting a golden glow over the water. This was where they would say their vows, surrounded by the people they loved most. Amara stood in silence for a moment, taking it all in. She could almost hear the laughter, the music, the joy that would fill this space tomorrow. "Amara," Terrence said quietly, pulling her close, "I know this has been a crazy ride, but I'm so proud of us. Not just for getting the resort, but for what it means. We've turned something that was meant to hurt us into something beautiful." Amara rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the weight of his words. He was right. They had taken something painful and experience rooted in exclusion and discrimination and turned it into a symbol of love, resilience, and inclusion. It hadn't been easy, but now, standing at the edge of this lake, she knew it had all been worth it. The next day was perfect. Amara stood in front of the full-length mirror in one of the lodge's newly renovated bridal suites, adjusting the intricate lace detailing on her wedding dress. She looked radiant, her excitement bubbling over as she thought about the ceremony just moments away. Her bridesmaids, her closest friends and family buzzed around her, making final adjustments to their dresses and helping with last-minute touches. "You look stunning," her best friend, Yvonne, said, stepping back to admire Amara and her wedding gown. Amara grinned, feeling the love and support from the women around her. "I can't believe this is really happening," she said, her voice soft but full of emotion. "Believe it," Yvonne said with a wink. "You've earned every bit of this." Down by the lake, Terence stood with his groomsmen, pacing slightly as he waited for the ceremony to begin. He glanced around at the guests, the familiar faces of friends and family, all gathered for this long-awaited celebration. He couldn't help but feel a surge of pride both in marrying the love of his life and in the incredible journey that had brought them here. Soon, the music began to play. The guests rose to their feet as Amara appeared at the top of the hill, making her way down toward the lake. She was breathtaking, her gown flowing behind her like a trail of clouds. Terence's heart swelled as their eyes met. This was their moment, the culmination of everything they had fought for. As they stood together at the edge of the lake, the officiant began the ceremony. The words spoken were not just about love and commitment, they were about resilience, about standing up for what was right, and about creating a future that embraced everyone. As Amara and Terence exchanged vows, promising to support and uplift each other for the rest of their lives, there wasn't a dry eye in the audience. When the ceremony ended, and the officiant announced them as husband and wife, the cheers erupted, echoing across the lake. Amara and Terence kissed, sealing their union and symbolizing the start of a new chapter both for their lives and for Cedar Pines. They had done it. Cedar Pines was no longer a place of exclusion. It was now a place where love, in all its forms, would always be celebrated. The celebration continued long into the evening. After the ceremony, Amara and Terence joined their family and friends in the grand ballroom, which was filled with laughter, music, and the soft glow of candlelight. The room had been transformed, both physically and symbolically, from what it once represented. Now, the ballroom was a place of joy, unity, and the embodiment of their victory over prejudice. As the music played and people danced, Amara took a moment to step outside and catch her breath. She wandered out onto the balcony, overlooking the lake, the cool evening breeze brushing against her skin. The moonlight reflected on the water, casting a serene glow over the resort grounds. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Terence approaching, his smile warm and full of love. "Thought you might need a moment," he said, slipping an arm around her waist as they gazed out at the water together. "I did," she admitted, resting her head against his shoulder. "It's all so overwhelming, in the best way possible. I still can't believe this is our life now." Terence chuckled softly. "Believe it. We've earned this moment. It wasn't easy, but we did what we set out to do." Amara nodded, her heart swelling with pride. "We did. Cedar Pines is ours, and it's going to be everything we dreamed of and more." They stood in silence for a few minutes, taking it all in, the laughter drifting from the ballroom, the peacefulness of the lake, the knowledge that they had turned something painful into something beautiful. As they stood there, the door to the ballroom opened and a familiar face appeared. It was Mr. Stone, the former manager of Cedar Pines. Amara and Terence hadn't expected to see him, but there he was, lingering awkwardly near the entrance, clearly uncomfortable but determined to speak. Amara glanced at Terence, who gave her a small nod, as if to say, "Let's see what he has to say." Mr. Stone hesitated for a moment before stepping forward. I just wanted to say congratulations," he said, his voice tense. "You've done quite a lot with the place." Amara and Terence exchanged a glance, knowing that this moment held more significance than just a simple congratulations. Mr. Stone was the embodiment of the old Cedar Pines, the version of the resort that had turned them away, the version that had upheld exclusion and discrimination. And now he was standing in front of them, forced to acknowledge their success. "Thank you," Amara said, her voice calm and steady. "We're proud of what we've accomplished here." Mr. Stone shifted uncomfortably. "I know things didn't go well before, and I wanted to apologize. I was wrong about a lot of things. The way we handled your request for the venue, the way we treated couples like you, it wasn't right." There was a pause as his words hung in the air. Amara took a deep breath. feeling the weight of his apology. She had spent months fighting against the culture Mr. Stone represented, and now here he was, admitting his mistakes. "It's good to hear you say that," Terrence finally replied, his voice firm but not unkind. "We didn't want to just expose what was wrong with Cedar Pines, we wanted to change it. And we have. This place is going to be different now for everyone." Mr. Stone nodded, clearly humbled by the situation. I can see that he said quietly, "You've made something better here. And for what it's worth, I'm sorry for standing in the way." Amara watched him for a moment, her emotions a mix of satisfaction and closure. "We appreciate the apology, Mr. Stone," she said. "But the best thing you can do now is to learn from this. It's not just about one resort. It's about making sure these kinds of things don't happen anywhere else." Mr. Stone nodded again, clearly at a loss for words. After another awkward pause, he turned to leave, quietly disappearing back into the night. Amara and Terrence watched him go, both feeling a sense of finality. "That felt unexpected," Amara said, leaning into Terrence. "It did," he agreed. "But I think it needed to happen." Amara smiled softly, nodding. "Yeah, it did." With Mr. Stone's departure, it felt like a chapter was closing. The old Cedar Pines was officially behind them, and now they could fully embrace the future they had created. As they turned to head back into the ballroom, they were greeted by cheers and applause from their guests. Amara's heart soared as she looked around at the faces of their friends and family, each one a reminder of the love and support they had throughout this journey. It was more than a celebration of their wedding, it was a celebration of resilience, of standing up for what was right, and of creating a space where everyone was truly welcome. Later in the evening, after the dancing had slowed and the guests began to filter out, Amara and Terrence stood together on the dance floor, watching as the final few people said their goodbyes. They held each other close, swaying to the soft music playing in the background. "We've come a long way," Terrence whispered, his voice full of emotion. Amara looked up at him, her eyes glistening with happy tears. "We really have, and this is just the beginning." As the last guest left and the ballroom grew quiet, Amara and Terrence stood in the center of the room, taking one final moment to themselves. The future stretched out before them, bright, full of promise, and completely in their control. "We're going to make Cedar Pines into something incredible," Amara said softly, resting her head against his chest. "A place that stands for everything we believe in." Terrence kissed the top of her head, his heart full. "I know we will." And as they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, they knew that they had not only redefined a resort, they had redefined what it meant to fight for love, justice, and equality. Cedar Pines was now a symbol of everything they had overcome, and everything they would build together.